Westchester, Ohio, a clean, quiet suburb where Indian families build their American dream, one grocery run, one school pickup, one festival at a time. But on April 28th, 2019, that dream turned into a crime scene. Inside a single apartment, four adults from one Indian family were found shot dead. Not together, but scattered like someone had moved through the home with purpose. A woman on the kitchen floor, an elderly aunt lying in the hallway, a mother in law in the living room, and the father in law inside a bedroom. There was no broken door, no struggle loud enough for neighbors to hear. Just a story that would shock an entire community and embroil a state. This is the story of the Westchester Quadruple murders. Hi everyone, welcome to the Desi Crime Podcast, a show where we dive deep into some of the craziest cases from around South Asia. I'm your host Ashwarya.
And I'm Aryan.
And the case that I have for you today is one that is so heartbreaking, so many lives lost in one fell swoop, and it shook an entire community.
Ashwarya, is it just me, or does it feel like over the past, 5 years, a decade, the instances of Indian Americans being the victims of whether it is familicide or homicide is on the rise? Is it just reportage about these coming out, or has there been a spike? Because honestly, like since we started the Desi Crime podcast, I remember in the first couple of years, it wasn't like we were coming across many Indian American crime cases,
sure.
despite us being in the US at the time.
Right.
And now, over the last 2 years, it just feels like there are so many cases of this ilk that I've lost count by this point.
I think compared to decades prior, obviously diaspora size has increased. Obviously reporting is better. Social media access makes this so much more amplified, where Indians sitting outside the US will probably want to draw a trend, and so those stories will get amplified and we'll, introspect and hear of them more. But I fully agree. And to me, what stood out when I was researching this case is the number of multiple family members dying. So whether it be a quadruple homicide or it be a triple murder in a family, same family. And again, within the family or from an intruder, someone from the outside, is just so many cases that we've covered on Desi Crime now. And in India, surprisingly, we don't have that many entire families gone stories. So it is scary.
Covering these stories, the ones that take place in America or India or wherever in the world, as long as they're Desi, requires us to power the powerhouse behind Desi Studios, for which we need your support. If you can, help by becoming a patron or YouTube member, where you get an endless amount of extra episodes and other perks. We don't just have any random sponsor on our podcast because we care about the kind of sponsors we bring on, which means many episodes aren't sponsored, and those are produced with your help when you go and become a member of some kind. And if you don't have the money to do it and you're broke as hell, like we were when we started the podcast, you can become a subscriber just by hitting the subscribe button, or follow if you're listening on Spotify or wherever. But enough of me trying to sell who we are. Now on with the case for today.
All links in the bio. April 28th, 2019. A panicked voice is on the phone with a 911 dispatcher in Westchester Township, Ohio. "My wife and my family are on the ground bleeding," the man pleads. It's a quiet Sunday night in an ordinary suburban apartment complex, until his desperate cries shatter the calm. Moments later, police officers race through the lakefront at Westchester Apartments and into a unit on Windtree Drive. What they find inside is a scene of so much violence. Four adults are sprawled across various corners of the home, collapsed in, quote, a good amount of blood, according to the emergency radio traffic. 39-year-old Shailenderjeet Kaur, the wife of the caller, was found on the kitchen floor with her arm positioned over her head. Paramjeet Kaur, the caller's mother-in-law, was found on the living room floor. Hakikat Singh, the caller's father-in-law, was found in one of the home's bedrooms, and 58-year-old Amarjeet Kaur, the caller's aunt-in-law, was found on the hallway floor. In the kitchen, a stainless steel pan has boiled over and burned dry on the stove, filling the air with the smell of burnt tea leaves. A smoke detector was shrilling incessantly, unheard by the 4 family members lying on the floors and furniture. An officer's voice crackles over the radio. "We have 4 victims. There's no sign of life," he says. Within minutes, yellow crime scene tape is draped across the apartment building, and red and blue lights flash across the manicured lawns and reflecting ponds of the complex as neighbors gather around. The first responders carefully step around shell casings and overturned furniture, checking each victim for a pulse in vain. 3 women and 1 man, all members of the same Sikh family, have been brutally shot to death inside their own home. The horrific discovery leaves even veteran officers shaken. This is Westchester Township's worst mass murder in memory, and the hunt for who could have committed it has only just begun. Standing outside in the breeze is the man who called 911, drenched in sweat and visibly trembling. He's wearing a red shirt smeared with blood. "Please help, they're bleeding, ma'am," he had begged the dispatcher moments earlier. "Sir, did you do something to them?" the dispatcher's voice had bluntly asked during the call. "No, I just got home," he insisted, wailing that he found his family shot and unresponsive.
We come across many cases where, of course, the person calling 911 is the one that has done the crime. I've never seen a recording or heard a recording where the dispatcher is point blank asking the caller, "Have you done it?"
Yeah.
Is that normal?
It's
or?
a little bit abrasive almost to put it like that. They do ask it in different ways where they're like, do you know what happened?
Right.
Do you know who could have done
Right,
this? Do you
right.
have any idea how they were shot? Do you know who shot them? I think those are still
Yeah, just
very
straight
pointed.
up
but
asking,
straight
"Have
up
you
being
done
like,
it?"
"Are you
is-
the murderer?" is a little bit, yeah.
Yeah.
But I think it's also, it's interesting that different kind of dispatchers can have these different just ways of dealing with these situations, because this is recording that police can later go on and listen to and see how did he react to this exact question, you know? What was the
Sure.
response to such a blatant
Yeah.
question just thrown at him? So
Yeah, because you forget that the dispatcher behind the 911 call is not a robot, right?
Right, they're human
so
too.
I've never actually thought about the investigative role they play.
Correct.
Because you're just assuming they have an SOP, a standard of procedure
getting
that they're
police
following,
there.
of getting the police there. They have questions that they ask, but clearly personalities come through, and
Absolutely.
yeah.
Yeah. Now, as officers question him, the man sobs uncontrollably and struggles to catch his breath. This was Gurpreet Singh, the patriarch of the home that has just turned into a crime scene generations will talk about, the husband of one of the victims, the son-in-law of 2 of the other victims. He tells police he had walked into a nightmare. His wife, his parents-in-law, and his mother-in-law's sister all lying on the floor, bleeding from the head. In shock and grief, he says he ran door to door, pounding for help while on phone with 911. Quickly, police separate Gurpreet from the grisly scene and secure him in the back of a cruiser as they begin their investigation. Around the neighborhood, stunned residents peer from balconies and doorways. Many of them personally knew the victims. They were a friendly, tight-knit Sikh Punjabi family that frequented the local Gurdwara. In the hours to come, word will spread rapidly through the area's Indian community that something unspeakable has happened in Westchester. 4 beloved members of the Panag family are dead, and one of their own, Gurpreet, is a witness, a survivor. But before the sirens and the police tape, there was an ordinary family behind the doors of 4562 Wintry Drive. A happy American immigrant family with a simple life. Shailinderjeet Shailinder Kaur, 39 years old, her husband Gurpreet, her father Hakikat Singh Panag, who's 59, her mother Paramjeet Kaur, 62, and Paramjeet's sister Amarjeet Kaur had all turned this foreign land into a home for themselves. They were part of the small but vibrant Sikh community in this area of Ohio, regularly attending prayers and volunteering at the local Gurdwara on Tylersville Road. Just hours before their deaths, in fact, some of them had been at the temple. Quote, "They were beloved, good, decent, hardworking people," recalled Jasminder Singh, a family friend who often shared Sunday tea with Hakikat. All 5 were immigrants from Punjab, seeking a better life in America, where in their Westchester apartment, 3 generations shared daily meals, chores, and dreams. Now, Shailinder and her parents had moved to Ohio over a decade earlier, and by 2019, they, quote, "felt like they were living the American dream." Hakikat Singh Panag, Shailinder's father and Gurpreet's father-in-law, grew up amid the rolling wheat fields and rice fields of Punjab. Like many Punjabi Sikh men of his generation, he found that even owning land back home didn't guarantee prosperity. And so, determined to make his fortune overseas, Hakikat left India in the 1980s. He traveled through Canada and eventually entered the United States without documentation, where for a time he lived in the shadows, taking odd jobs and dreaming of a day owning a string of gas stations. In a story worthy of a Chai and Chitti episode, Hakikat entered into a marriage of convenience with an American woman in Pennsylvania to obtain legal status, even sending divorce papers back to India to his wife Paramjeet during that period. The American woman, Nancy, briefly became Shailender's legal adoptive mother so that the infant could be brought to the US. In time, the gamble succeeded. Hakikat gained residency, divorced his American sponsor, and remarried his true love Paramjeet Kaur, bringing her and young Shailinder to join him in the US by the mid 1990s. It was an unconventional and illegal path, but in Hakikat's mind, it was worth it. Quote, he was a great friend, he was a great dad, he was a great grandfather, and he was a great husband, said Jasminder Singh, president of the local Sikh Gurdwara, who knew Hakikat for 11 years. Despite past struggles, by 2019, Hakikat was viewed as a family man who had worked hard to provide for his loved ones. Every Sunday, he'd be found at the temple, sipping chai with friends and enthusiastically discussing Punjabi politics or sports. At home, he loved watching Indian news on channels and doting on his grandchildren. By 2019, though, at the center of this bustling household was his daughter, Shailenderjeet Kaur, now no longer a young girl, but a woman who ran her home with respect and dignity. She was Hakikat and Paramjeet's only daughter, born in Punjab, largely raised in the United States, but doted after her wherever she went. Those who knew Shailinder described her in loving terms. Sweet, angelic, shy. She had not a bad word to say about anyone, a longtime friend said. And Shailinder was a woman utterly devoted to her family, especially to her 3 young children whom she adored. She couldn't even kill an ant, laughed Balwinder Kaur, a close friend who had known Shailinder since her youth in California. Yet, this wasn't a home without problems. Hakikat was not without flaws. Like many, he enjoyed whiskey and social drinking, but just maybe a little too much. Over the years, Hakikat developed a serious alcohol problem that strained the household. When he drank, he became loud and argumentative, at times even getting in trouble for drunk driving. His wife Paramjeet often had to, quote, use all her strength to quiet him down during those boisterous drunken episodes, occasionally even calling on her son-in-law, Gurpreet's help to calm him. Eventually, the situation deteriorated to the point that Hakikat moved out of the family home for a while to live in a separate apartment nearby. Despite these troubles, though, his family still loved him deeply. They hoped he would conquer his demons and return home healthy and like himself again. And that happened slowly. By April 2019, it seemed Hakikat had moved back in or was at least spending more time with the family, especially with a special event looming: the arrival of his wife's sister from India. If Hakikat was the family's strong-willed patriarch, his wife Paramjeet Kaur was its heart. Paramjeet had endured a lot, raising little Shailinder alone in India for several years while her husband pursued the American dream, then rebuilding a life with Hakikat in a foreign land. In New Jersey, where they first settled in the States, Paramjeet and Hakikat tried running a small gas station together, but opportunities were limited. Eventually, they moved to Ohio, drawn by leads on businesses for sale in the Midwest and by the presence of relatives. By the late 2000s, the extended family, including Shailinder and her husband Gurpreet, all ended up in the area, which had a thriving Indian community and one of the region's largest Sikh Gurdwaras. In Ohio, Paramjeet picked up part-time work to help make ends meet. She found a humble job at a local laundromat, folding towels for hourly pay. Whatever extra money she earned was put towards the family's future and towards her dream of one day returning to India to visit loved ones. Described as traditional and devout, Paramjeet wore her salwar kameez dresses and never cut her hair, adhering to her customs even in America. She was the keeper of culture for her grandchildren too, telling them Punjabi folk tales and enrolling them in Sunday language classes at the temple so they would stay fluent in their heritage. In the kitchen, Paramjeet's cooking melded 2 worlds: sarson da saag and makki ki roti for family dinners, alongside the occasional pizza night to please the kids. Neighbors at the lakefront complex knew Paramjeet as gentle, a smiling presence often seen with her daughter and grandkids. In fact, one neighbor recalled seeing Paramjeet just a day before the murders, excitedly chatting about an upcoming trip. She had a plane ticket to India for April 30th, 2019, 2 days after the night that she was killed. Paramjeet was going home to Punjab to check on the family's land and perhaps secure a buyer for it, and she was busy buying gifts for relatives back home. It would be her first visit in years, a chance to reconnect with her roots. Importantly, though, Paramjeet's long awaited trip to India coincided with another major development. Her younger sister, Amarjeet Kaur, had just arrived from India to live with the family in the US permanently. Amarjeet, 58 years old, was the fourth victim in the massacre, and her life had not been easy either. Widowed more than a decade earlier, she had raised two sons by herself in India. With her boys now grown, one living in Canada and the other in Australia, Amarjeet found herself alone. So Paramjeet sponsored her sister to immigrate to the United States, hoping to reunite the siblings and give Amarjeet a chance at a peaceful life in America. Amarjeet landed in Ohio in April 2019, only weeks before the murders, and moved into the Westchester apartment with open arms waiting for her. The family even helped Amarjeet get a small job at the same laundromat as Paramjeet to keep her busy and earning pocket money. By all accounts, Amarjeet was delighted to be with her sister's family. Quote, she was angelic, saintly, recalled her son Jasdeep of his mother. She spent all her time praying for everyone. She smiled all the time. She was always positive, he said. Gentle and soft-spoken, Amarjeet was deeply religious too and wore a constant smile. She too became an active member of the local Gurdwara upon arrival. So now, by late April 2019, three generations of the Panag family, with all of these permutations and combinations, were living under one roof in Westchester. The house was now brimming with laughter and joy. And that morning, Sunday, April 28th, 2019, was just as happy and normal as many before it. No one could have imagined that by nightfall, three of those who sat in prayer that morning would be dead, and the fourth, Gurpreet, would be standing outside his home dialing 911. Now, in any other circumstance, Gurpreet Singh might have been seen as a success story in this immigrant tale. At 37 years old in 2019, Gurpreet was the breadwinner of the extended family and by many accounts, a dutiful son, husband and father. He was born in Punjab as well, the son of Karam Singh and Daljit Kaur, a farming family from the village of Manupur. As a boy, Gurpreet helped work the family's wheat fields and studied hard in school, even learning English in the hopes of one day going abroad. In 2002, at age 20, he got this chance. During one of the Panang family visits back to India, Gurpreet and 23-year-old Shailenderjeet were introduced and wed in a traditional arranged marriage. The match followed the customs of their parents and grandparents before them, and both families gave their blessings to new members. For Shailender, marrying Gurpreet meant returning to the US with a partner to start her own family. For Gurpreet, it was the beginning of a new life in America, and he embraced it fully. After the wedding, Gurpreet joined Shailender in the States, where the young couple initially lived with some of Gurpreet's relatives for a few years. They were, by all outward appearances, very much in love. Quote, they were happy all the time. They never fought. One cousin who lived with them remembered, noting that he, quote, never saw any sign of discord between Gurpreet and Shailender. Photo albums from their early years show photos of them smiling. They're an affectionate pair attending weddings, dancing at parties, posing together in front of birthday cakes. Over the next decade, Gurpreet and Shailender built a family and pursued the American dream side by side. Gurpreet had entrepreneurial ambitions. Not long after arriving, he jumped at an opportunity to buy a gas station in Kentucky, so the couple moved to a small town there to try their hand at business. Unfortunately, though, that venture fell through. The gas station deal did not work out as hoped. But undeterred, Gurpreet pivoted to a different industry that many Punjabi immigrants find success in: trucking. He earned his commercial driver's license and started his own trucking company called Rolling Hills, Ohio, hauling freight across state lines. By driving 70 to 80-hour weeks, Gurpreet steadily grew the business to include at least one semi-truck of his own and a couple of trailers. Trucking gave him a decent income to support the extended family, and he was proud of being an owner-operator. Meanwhile, Shailender gave birth to 3 children, 2 daughters and a son in the 2000s. By 2019, the kids were about 12, 9 and 4 years old, and from the moment of their birth became the light of the household. Gurpreet was a doting father too, often playing with the kids when he wasn't on the road. Shailender, also an equally devoted mother, spent the last day of her life driving her little ones to a bhangra practice and back from there. From all accounts, Gurpreet and Shailender's marriage of 17 years seemed steady and strong to those on the outside. She often told friends how lucky she felt to have a happy marriage. However, in the months leading up to April 2019, something was building behind the cheerful facade.
Aishwarya, where are these three children during the time of this murder?
They're actually at a relative's home, and we're going to talk about that.
Okay.
Unbeknownst to many, Gurpreet and Shailendra's relationship had been struggling, and the two major sources of tensions were money and infidelity. On the financial front, supporting a large family was challenging. Although Gurpreet's trucking business provided a solid income, there were dreams of doing more. The family had been renting apartments for years, but Gurpreet wanted a permanent home. By early 2019, he had managed to put down a generous deposit on a new 5-bedroom house under construction in Indiana, which had added to the strain. The plan was for the whole family to move into this spacious new house and for Gurpreet's own elderly parents, still in Punjab, to join them in America as he began the sponsorship paperwork to bring his mother and father overseas. It was an ambitious plan that spoke to Gurpreet's optimism about the future. Yet financing these dreams was another matter. Unknown to many, Hakikat and Paramjeet had substantial assets of their own. A parcel of ancestral land back in India valued at around 1 million US dollars they had been trying to sell to free up cash. In fact, they had struck a deal some years back with one of Gurpreet's distant relatives, a man named Kuldeep Singh Sekho, to buy the land on an installment plan. But payments had stalled, leading to an ongoing land dispute. Hakikat had moved back to India for a time to sort out the deal, and by 2019, the buyers still owed the family 1.55 million US dollars, according to Gurpreet's relatives. This so-called land deal with the land mafia would later loom large as a potential motive for violence, since the buyers back in India were known to have criminal backgrounds. Within the family, the stalled land payments were a point of frustration. Hakikat and Paramjeet often discussed needing that money, especially to fund their retirement and the new life in America. There were even arguments between Hakikat and Gurpreet about money, because with Gurpreet covering nearly all the household expenses, rent, bills, groceries, he had slowly grown to resent that Hakikat couldn't contribute more due to his drinking problems. Tensions over living arrangements occasionally flared too, all to the extent that by 2019, Gurpreet and Hakikat's relationship had worsened too. But even bigger than money, the resentment, the modest home with so many people, the biggest blow to Shailendra and Gurpreet's marriage came in March 2019. That month, Shailendra opened a bank statement and saw something she almost had to do a double take off to believe. A cancelled check for 20,000 US dollars made out to a woman named Navkiran Kaur. Navkiran was not a relative. She was a Punjabi woman living in Indiana who was known in their community for having gone through a messy divorce and financial troubles because of it. Her ex-husband had spitefully sold their house to a cousin for $1 US to keep it from her, and Navkiran desperately needed funds to buy it back. But why Shailendra demanded was her husband Gurpreet secretly giving this acquaintance 20,000 US dollars. Gurpreet didn't deny helping Navkiran, but he tried to downplay it, saying he was just being supportive to a friend in need. He did not, though, tell Shailendra the truth, that Navkiran was more than a friend. In reality, as investigators later uncovered, Gurpreet Singh had been carrying out a long-term extramarital affair with Navkiran, effectively keeping a mistress in another state. He had even been financially supporting her in other significant ways, not only the $20,000 check for her house, but also buying her a car and paying part of her mortgage. These weren't small Valentine's Day gifts, they were substantial drains on a family already starting to struggle. To make matters worse, Navkiran lived in the very same Indiana subdivision where Gurpreet was building the family's new 5-bedroom house. The intersection of these two worlds was a recipe for disaster. When Shailendra realized the extent of her husband's betrayal, that he was funneling family money to another woman who lived down the street from their future home, she was devastated. Friends later said Shailendra appeared sad and defeated after this revelation. Yet, true to who she'd always been, she wasn't confrontational. She confided in a couple of close Gurdwara friends on the condition that they tell no one that she had no intention of leaving Gurpreet despite the affair. They had been married 17 years, Shailendra said, and she had 3 children to think about. She would try to work through it. She didn't want a divorce, even if her trust in Gurpreet was deeply shaken. If anything, Shailendra's instinct was to pretend things were okay in public. Quote, they've been married happily for 17 years, she insisted to friends while privately nursing her heartbreak. And so outwardly, life went on normal. They continued planning their move to Indiana. Paramjeet prepared for her trip to India, and they welcomed Aunt Amarjeet into their home with joy in April. But under the surface, enormous tensions were coiled: a marriage in trouble, a looming financial crunch, and unresolved disputes over a fortune in land. It is against this backdrop that the events of April 28, 2019 unfolded. By the end of that day, 4 people would be dead. Sunday, April 28, 2019 began as a day of worship and routine for the Panag family, giving no warning of what was to come. According to statements Gurpreet later gave and evidence police pieced together, the day's timeline went roughly as follows. That morning, Gurpreet woke up late, around 9 am, which is later than usual for him. He later mentioned he had pulled a muscle in his back, perhaps from a volleyball game earlier, so he decided to take it easy at home that day. Meanwhile, the rest of the family was up and about. It was a sunny spring Sunday, and the women of the house, Paramjeet and Amarjeet, had shifts at the laundromat. They headed out together to work, likely chatting in Punjabi as they walked or drove to the nearby shopping plaza where the laundromat was located. With Amarjeet newly arrived and job training alongside her sister, the two seemed glad for any time spent together, even if it meant folding towels for a few hours on a weekend. Back at the apartment, Gurpreet stretched out on the living room carpet to ease his sore back while his father-in-law, Hakikat, watched TV nearby. The channel was tuned to Indian election news, politics back home, and the two men chatted about the perpetual corruption of Punjabi politicians, according to Gurpreet's later recollections. After some time, Hakikat decided to get ready and go to the Gurdwara for midday prayer or for some socializing. He left the apartment, leaving Gurpreet alone watching the kids. Around lunchtime, Gurpreet cooked a simple meal for himself and the children. Then early in the afternoon, Shailinder took over childcare duties. She had promised to drive the kids to their Bhangra dance practice from 3 to 4 p.m., a class held at a community center not far away. And so, dot on time, Shailinder loaded her 3 excited children into her minivan and headed off to the dance session. This would be the last time those kids would see their mother alive. With the children out and the apartment temporarily quiet, Gurpreet decided to use the time to address some of his own work. He left in the late afternoon to tend to his semi-truck, which he kept parked at a trucking lot on Mulhauser Road, a short drive away. Surveillance footage and later GPS data would confirm Gurpreet's truck was indeed at that lot and that he spent some time there. He says he was fixing a broken tail light and checking the oil levels on his rig, preparing for an upcoming haul, after which records show that he stopped by a UDF gas station to fill up his pickup truck and perhaps grab a snack. It was an ordinary errand on an ordinary day. Until it wasn't. By early evening, one by one, the family members converged back towards the apartment. An unfortunate choreography that placed them all in the one place they shouldn't have been that day, their own home. Paramjeet and Amarjeet likely returned home from work sometime late afternoon or early evening, maybe around 5 or 6 p.m., and started preparing dinner or tea. Shailinder came back with the children after 4 p.m. from dance practice, and then at some point she dropped the kids off with a cousin or a family friend for the evening.
So I just want to point out a couple things here. Number one, for our listeners in India, is that trucking in US is actually, while a very difficult job,
Grueling job.
One of the it's a job with one of the highest rates of suicide, along with rap. Rappers
Sure.
and truckers sort of have one of the highest suicide rate because of how stressful it is. However, it pays, even if you don't own the truck, it
Astronomically
pays roughly $100,000, which is about 90 lakh rupees a year. So it's a profitable job. Just to, this is not middle class, so to say. They're doing decently. That's one thing. The second thing is, of course, my brain is going towards Gurpreet being responsible for the crimes that have been committed. I had assumed that he was the one that vacated the kids because he was trying to create that situation where, the kids don't get killed.
Yeah.
But this was done by Shailinder. She dropped the kids off somewhere else. So that's
Correct.
one detail. And insofar as the day this Sunday that you've described, nothing seems like there was a premeditated homicide at all, unless there's like a detail that you've not
feels like
shared.
routine.
It feels like routine. It feels
Go about your day. Just a murder's about to happen
Yeah.
somewhere in the middle. I think with the kids' detail, the detail that we don't have is that while Shailinder did the dropping, who arranged for the kids to be
and was it
dropped off?
pre-planned?
Exactly.
And
Who
was
said
it a
the kids
window?
should go out today?
Right,
And there is
right.
a reason why they should go
Sure.
out. Maybe that did come from Gurpreet. We just don't have that information.
Got it.
But you're right. In all other metrics, it just
A regular day.
Completely regular. We just did that case of the two siblings where the sibling that is murdering
Exactly.
her, sister she's gone through this elaborate plan of planning a day where she knew everyone was going to be out at a wedding, where she's made sure that she knows when the kid will cry so the sister comes back from
Yeah.
work sooner, that her husband isn't coming back anytime soon, it's just at night so she can turn the lights
Yeah.
off, no one can see inside. There's just so much planning to that murder, and here is just like, go about your day.
Yeah.
Something's just like a ball's gonna drop anytime now. Now, with the kids safe elsewhere for a few hours, Shailinda returned home to a household of only adults. Perhaps she and her mother and aunt enjoyed a rare, quiet cup of tea together or chatted about the upcoming India trip as they cooked a light supper. Haqiqat too came back from the Gurdwara at some point, likely had dinner or tea, and then, being a man who rose early for work, might have decided to retire to bed early that night. In fact, investigators believe Haqiqat was lying in bed, possibly asleep when the shooters came. Sometime after 9 pm, neighbors later recalled hearing what sounded like muffled pops or noises. One neighbor said, quote, "But it didn't sound like anything unusual." These noises were gunshots, though no one recognized them as such in the moment. Westchester police would later estimate that somewhere around 9:15 pm that night, the killings occurred. The horror that transpired in those moments can only be partially reconstructed from forensic evidence. Investigators determined that the shooters first ambushed Haqiqat Singh in the master bedroom, firing multiple shots into him at close range while he lay in bed. Haqiqat never had a chance. He was found later with his arms still tucked near his body, as if asleep, and the bed soaked in blood.
You keep saying shooters plural.
Yeah,
So
shooter
why
or
d-
shooters.
Okay, shooter. But the police doesn't know or
No,
hasn't hypothesized
they
whether it
don't.
is single or multiple.
No, but initially there is a lot of conversation among people who know the crime scene a little bit more intimately of just how are four people overpowered. There are two exits in a
100%.
home, especially in these American homes. This one had it as well. There are two exits, a front exit, a back exit. Someone's getting shot in the bedroom. How are other people not
No,
running
no,
out?
100%. Like,
So
because while the shooting, even with a suppressor, is a muffled sound for those on the outside of the house, inside the house it is still loud enough for
Yeah,
you to
yeah, yeah.
panic and try to do
Absolutely.
something.
Yeah.
So I would agree that it seems rather weird that it's a single shooter would be capable of this, but it's okay. I just wanted
This
to
is this is a
clarify.
point of conversation throughout
Okay,
this case.
cool.
Yeah. Now Haqiqat had been shot 8 times, all 8 times in the
Wow.
head, so viciously that his eyes were destroyed. The patriarch of the family likely died without ever fully awakening. Hearing the gunfire, the 3 women in the apartment would have had mere seconds to react. It appears Paramjeet Kaur was in the kitchen at the time, perhaps brewing her nightly cup of chai. A pan was left on the stove, forgotten. That's the one that eventually boiled over and burnt, filling the kitchen with smoke until the alarm pierced the air. Paramjeet seemed to have turned from the stove towards the bedroom hallway when the killer confronted her. She was shot 4 times, again all in the head, and also suffered a wound to her hand and forearm as if she was raising her arms in defense. Paramjeet collapsed and died near the kitchen area. Shailinderjeet Kaur and Amarjeet Kaur were in or near the living room, possibly watching TV before the chaos erupted. Perhaps they sprung up at the sound of the first shots, maybe ran a few steps towards the kitchen or the bedroom. Neither made it far though. Shailendra was shot 3 times, including once through her head and another defensive wound. She fell on the kitchen floor, her right arm draped over her head as if instinctively trying to shield herself. Amarjeet was shot twice in the head and dropped near Shailendra, only a few feet away in the dining living area. In total, roughly 16 to 18 shots were fired at the 4 victims. All 4 were struck in the head multiple times, an unmistakable execution-style barrage. The brutality was staggering. Bullets riddled their skulls at close range. Bullet casings littered the floor. Whoever the shooter was, he or she showed no mercy and no hesitation in gunning down a family in cold blood.
Ashwara, those many headshots seem like a professional job to me.
But it's also so close range.
Yeah, but still somebody, I mean, unless there were many shots that did not hit the target, and that's why the firing was so,
But then it would have hit other parts of the body as well.
yeah, that's what I'm thinking, which is why those many headshots seem like somebody who's familiar with guns and somebody who knows how to aim for a target and go for it. Because, yeah, I mean, headshots are not easy, even if it's close range. It seems like somebody who knows what they're doing.
Interesting. That's not what came to my mind because of the whole close range thing, but maybe you're right.
Yeah.
And then, as suddenly as it began, the gunfire stopped. Silence, except for the wail of the smoke alarm triggered by the forgotten pan on the stove, and perhaps the faint sound of a car engine starting in the distance. It was now approximately 9:40 p.m. Moments later, a figure, Gurpreet, appeared outside the apartment, banging on neighbors' doors in a frenzy. Several residents soon found Gurpreet at their threshold, quote, screaming for help with a phone clutched to his ear. On the other end of the line, 911 dispatchers tried to make sense of the hysteria. "They're bleeding from the head," Gurpreet cried to the dispatcher, gasping for breath. "Please, please send help," he implored anyone who would listen, that his entire family had been shot inside.
911, where's your emergency?
Yes, ma'am, my wife and my family are bleeding.
Your wife and your family are doing what?
They're on the ground, staying on the ground and bleeding.
The 911 call came in at 9:42 p.m., according to police reports. Westchester Township police units were immediately dispatched for, quote, a shots fire call with multiple people down. The first officers on scene found Gurpreet out front, hysterical, covered in what appeared to be blood. They drew their guns and cautiously entered the apartment, unsure if an active shooter might still be inside. But there was no one left to fight or save. Only the 4 victims already gone. Officers quickly cleared each room, confirming the carnage and securing the area. One officer's body-worn camera recorded the eerie scene as he moved through the residence. "Do you know who may have done this?" an officer asked Gurpreet outside. Gurpreet, between sobs, shook his head no. He told police he had just returned home to find the massacre and had not seen the assailant. Within the hour, the quiet apartment complex was swarmed by law enforcement, local police, county sheriff's deputies, and soon detectives and crime scene specialists. News crews began arriving before midnight, lights glaring against the facade of the apartment building. The community was in shock. Quote, "It's a little unsettling to know someone like that is out there doing those things," said one neighbor, Moses Weiss, shaken by the idea that a killer might be on the loose. Westchester's police chief, Joel Herzog, addressed the public, emphasizing that this appeared to be a targeted killing, quote, "not random and not a hate crime," suggesting the perpetrator likely knew the victims. That night, patrols were increased in the area to reassure residents, even as detectives fanned out to begin interviewing neighbors and canvassing for clues. Meanwhile, the 4 victims' remains were carefully examined where they lay, then zipped into body bags and carried out into the night. Some of Shailender's friends from the temple, who had seen her alive just hours earlier that day, learned with horror that she had been among those carried out. Quote, "They cried when they heard of her being carried out in a body bag, hours after she last saw them," a community member said. At the scene, investigators started the meticulous process of collecting evidence. There was no sign of forced entry noted. The front door was found open when Gurpreet arrived, he said. Could the family have known their killer and opened the door willingly? Or did someone have a key? The questions loomed. Shell casings from a 9mm handgun were recovered on the floor. Blood splatter patterns and bullet trajectories were documented. Later autopsies would confirm that all 4 victims were shot in the head at close range, as suspected. But one crucial piece of evidence was not immediately found that night: the murder weapon. Police scoured the apartment and surrounding area but did not locate a gun. Given the carnage, it was clear the shooter had likely fled with the weapon or tossed it somewhere en route. The very next day, a dive team from the Ohio Bureau of Criminal Investigation was deployed to search the small lake directly behind the apartment building. For 2 days, divers probed the murky water. And sure enough, in that retention pond behind the complex, they found what they were looking for: a 9mm handgun sunken in the muck, the serial number filed off.
That's crazy.
Right? That is some good investigative work.
Yeah, and I mean, for 2 days, not giving up and being so sure that if it's somewhere, it's there, and we'll not give up. Because to me, it's literally like finding a needle in a haystack.
Absolutely, someone could have just taken it back with them.
Because
you have no idea.
You have to search the entire floor bed of the water body, because the gun would have sunk down completely. So
I think this faith that they will find it somewhere around the house is coming from the fact that they already think this is not a random killing.
True, 100%.
So the killer has not taken the weapon back. Because the killer is somewhere in the circle. The killer is possibly Gurpreet. The killer could be anybody.
Yeah. Also, one thing, I think this is by virtue of us just having covered so many cases. But I feel like if somebody who's in the know-how of the family who commits the killing, I think you should be, quote unquote, smart enough to fake a forced opening. Because for investigators, it becomes so easy the moment like a window isn't broken or a door isn't broken into, you know for a fact that the person was let in.
But you remember exactly in that last case of the two sisters, the killer had tried to recreate a force opening. The only thing they got wrong, and this is the beauty of human error, they were trying to make it seem like someone broke a window, put their hand in and opened the door from inside. It's just that, Aryan, when someone is breaking into a house and breaking a window, they're throwing a rock from the outside, so the glass splatter is inside.
Oh, yeah.
This person is faking it. They did it from the inside out. There's glass splatter on the outside.
Wow.
And so in a moment of frenzy and panic in the middle of a
Yeah,
murder,
I'm sure. I mean, yeah, it's
this is the
again,
level of error.
correct,
you know?
correct. Fully.
So, yeah.
Yeah, it's just, part of me, and the post hoc rationalization is a funny thing where you can, you can come up with multiple theories for the same act. In this case, when initially I said, oh, the headshots seem like it's a professional job, but also headshots are a very intimate form of killing somebody.
Correct.
So that requires a lot of rage and anger. So maybe this was somebody that harbored a lot of resentment towards these people.
Absolutely.
But again, Gurpreet, just from whatever you've told me, doesn't come off as somebody that's harboring so much hate.
So much hate.
That he would kill all his loved ones in the more than a dozen shots to his father-in-law.
He really doesn't. That is true. There is a lot of this stuff. And obviously Gurpreet's going to hide from the police the fact that he's having an affair and whatnot. And his own lawyers will later come forward to say that you really did not need to. It doesn't make you a murderer. Lying about it makes the police feel like if you can lie about having an affair, you lie about so much more.
And again, this is things that come out after a big thing have happened. If in most of the families of the folks that are listening to the show right now, God forbid, the police start investigating you for something, they'll find 10 other things that are unrelated to the crime they're investigating you for. If you lie about that because you're just scared of public shame and whatnot, they seem interconnected even if they're not. Now, I'm not saying Gurpreet is innocent, but I'm just saying that a lot of the elements here just don't seem like Gurpreet being the one that did it. But again, please let us know of more evidence that comes out.
Let's go for it. So now they had found the murder weapon. This was the firearm used in the murders. Whoever the killer was, they had ditched the gun into the pond likely moments after fleeing out the back of the apartment. The discovery of the weapon was a significant break in the case, providing potential forensics like fingerprints, DNA touch evidence, or later ballistics matching to bullets or recoveries from the victims. Even as forensic teams worked though, detectives were also gently, pointedly interviewing Gurpreet Singh, the sole surviving family member from the apartment. Standard procedure in such cases is to treat the closest witness with a mix of care and skepticism. And that's exactly what Westchester police did. In the early hours of April 29th, they brought Gurpreet to the station for a detailed statement. Gurpreet was described as being in shock, claiming he had no idea who could have done this. According to what he told police and later repeated in court, he had arrived home that night to find the front door unlocked and slightly open. The sight inside was something he said will haunt him forever. His entire family sprawled on the floor, blood everywhere, the fire alarm shrieking. He said he quickly realized, quote, they were bleeding from the head and not responding to his shouts. That's when he dialed 911 and then ran outside for help. One can only imagine the questions detectives asked him in that first interview. What had he been doing that evening? Why were the children not home? Did the family have any enemies? Gurpreet likely repeated what he later testified, that he spent the late afternoon working on his truck and fueling up, then came back home after 9 p.m. He wasn't sure of the exact time, he said. As for enemies, Gurpreet allegedly mentioned the possibility of that land dispute in India, suggesting maybe someone had followed Hakikat from India or sent hired killers to wipe out the family over the $1 million land deal. It sounded far-fetched, but not entirely impossible. There have been cases of cross-continental vendettas in the past. And this early stage, nothing could be ruled out for the police. Still, Westchester police did not jump to conclusions. Quote, it's easy for people to say this is the person who did it, but there is due process that takes place, Chief Herzog cautioned the public when they asked why an arrest hasn't been made. We have evidence and rules of evidence we have to follow. We had to make sure no stone was unturned, he said. In the days following the murders, Westchester police worked around the clock to unravel this mystery. Behind the scenes, investigators gathered a trove of evidence from the crime scene and beyond. and key findings soon emerged. Firstly, tests on Gurpreet's clothing that night detected traces of gunshot residue as well as blood splatter from the victims. Gurpreet had told officers he got blood on himself by checking the bodies. That could explain some blood, but gunshot residue is harder to explain for an innocent bystander. Typically, GSR on a person's hand or clothing indicates they either fired a gun or were in extremely close proximity to a gun that was being fired. Finding GSR on Gurpreet raised red flags. Secondly, GPS and phone data. Detectives pulled data from Gurpreet's cell phone and his truck's GPS tracking. This was crucial. It showed that Gurpreet's phone or vehicle arrived at the apartment complex around 9:11 p.m. on April 28th. Prosecutors later said location data proved he was in the parking lot by 9:03 or 9:11 p.m. In any case, well before that 911 call came in at 9:42 p.m. If Gurpreet just got home and found them, as he claimed on the phone, one would expect the 911 call almost immediately upon arrival. But the data suggested he was at the scene for a good 30 to 40 minutes before calling 911. What was he doing during that half-hour gap? This discrepancy became a cornerstone of the case. As Butler County Prosecutor John Marshall put it in court, quote, "They, the victims, were alive until he got home." In the prosecutor's view, Gurpreet arrived around 9:11 p.m., took about 30 minutes to execute the murders and attempt a cleanup or staging, and then finally called 911, feigning surprise and grief. Third, murder weapon ballistics. The 9mm handgun recovered from the pond was analyzed by ballistics experts. As expected, test firings showed a match between the gun and the shell casing bullets from the crime scene. Confirmed, it was the same weapon. The serial number on the gun had been filed off, indicating an effort to make it untraceable. This suggested planning and a desire to evade identification. A random burglar or an outsider might not bother to obliterate serial numbers. If Gurpreet was the owner, he likely wouldn't want it traced to him. Investigators looked into whether Gurpreet had purchased or owned any firearms, and if so, whether this could be one of them with defaced markings. Public sources don't detail how the handgun was acquired, but the fact it was dumped rather than kept on hand could indicate that it was stolen. Fourth, the lies and the inconsistencies. As the interrogation of Gurpreet continued in days after, detectives caught him in some lies. Most notably, Gurpreet initially lied about his extramarital affair. When asked routine questions about family issues, he denied any infidelity or serious marital problems. But investigators had already been digging into phone records and learnt about Navkiran Kaur, the mysterious recipient of the $20,000 check. When confronted, Gurpreet eventually admitted to the affair, which did him no favors in terms of credibility. Quote, "He probably should not have lied to the police. An affair does not make him a killer," his defense later argued. Fifth is possible motives. By speaking with relatives and friends, police built a picture of potential motives. Financial strain and the affair emerged as two glaring issues. The fact that Gurpreet needed money, had conflicts with his father-in-law, was giving all that cash to his mistress, and that Hakikat had not agreed to demands for more money could have been a motive. If Shailinder found out about the mistress, which she did, and threatened any action, that could be a motive as well. Another possible motive was more cold-blooded. If Gurpreet expected his wife to inherit her parents' valuable land eventually, eliminating them might fast-track that inheritance. One of Paramjeet's brothers, Ajaib Singh, the same uncle who had helped raise Shailinder as a child, openly speculated that, quote, Gurpreet married Shailinderjeet because he would get a green card and she would inherit the land. And then he realized Hakikat was not dying anytime soon, and so he killed them, end quote. In Ajaib's view, Gurpreet was a greedy manipulator. This was an opinion, not hard evidence, but it shows what the victim's family believed from day one. While investigators increasingly fixated on Gurpreet as the prime suspect, they methodically checked other angles too. They followed countless leads, as Chief Herzog noted, including the possibility of outside perpetrators related to the land dispute. And the defense would later latch onto that theory. But for nearly 2 months while all of this is happening, no arrests are made. All of this while Gurpreet Singh, not yet charged, remained a free man dealing with the aftermath. In public, he was the grieving husband and son-in-law, organizing funerals and caring for his kids. The Sikh community rallied around the family initially. In early May 2019, a combined funeral for the 4 victims drew hundreds of mourners. The funeral was an emotional ceremony, blending Sikh rites with a desperate search for answers. The bodies had been in bad shape, so by the time of the cremation, they were said to, quote, look unrecognizable like waxy caricatures of their former selves, as one family member described. But it was at the funeral that attendees noticed something striking. The two sides of the family, Gurpreet's relatives and Shailender's relatives, sat separate and did not speak to each other the entire time. A silent rift had formed. In those interim weeks, Gurpreet's behavior was under a microscope. According to relatives of the victims, he acted strangely. Amarjeet's sons, who had flown in from Canada and Australia to attend their mother's funeral, later called Gurpreet a good actor, a liar, a conman who put on a show of grief. They observed him closely and felt his tears were insincere, his affect flat when it suited him. Of course, observations of behavior are subjective, but suspicion in the family was running hot. So much so that at one point, the victim's family publicly demanded that the killer face the harshest punishment. Quote, he's a mass murderer. We demand a minimum of 4 death penalties. Life isn't acceptable, declared Ajay Singh. Emotions were clearly intense. As June turned to July, Gurpreet made plans to leave Ohio, at least temporarily. He and his children traveled to the East Coast to attend a family wedding in Connecticut. Whether Gurpreet was attempting to flee or genuinely attending a wedding is up for debate. But on July 2nd, 2019, just 64 days after the murders, Westchester police finally made their move. Acting on a tip about his whereabouts, they coordinated with law enforcement in Connecticut. Gurpreet was staying at a relative's home in a town called Brantford. Brantford police staked out the residence on July 2nd. When Gurpreet drove to a local Walmart parking lot that afternoon, perhaps running an errand or en route to a wedding event, officers swarmed in and arrested him without incident. He was taken into custody around 2 p.m. in broad daylight, to the astonishment of bystanders at the Walmart. Quote, no one was injured in the apprehension, thank God, Brantford's police chief noted, mindful that arresting a quadruple murder suspect could have dangerous consequences. Immediately after, Gurpreet Singh, at age 37, was charged with 4 counts of aggravated murder. Back in Ohio, Butler County prosecutor Mike Moser announced that given the horrific facts, he would pursue the death penalty against Gurpreet Singh. Quote, there will be a day of reckoning in respect to this case, Moser vowed, signaling the gravity with which the state viewed the crime. The legal proceedings that followed turned out to be long and dramatic, stretching over the next 5 years and involving not 1, but 2 trials. Gurpreet Singh, proclaiming his innocence, assembled a defense team and prepared to fight for his life in court. And what unfolded as a result was a complex battle of narratives. The courtroom would be the stage where these dueling stories played out in September of 2022. That is when Gurpreet's first trial commenced in Butler County Common Pleas Court. He faced 4 counts of aggravated murder with death penalty specifications. The prosecution team, led by John Marshall and Mike Moser, methodically laid out the evidence. The GPS data, the blood, the GSR on Gurpreet, the hidden affair, the financial motives, the recovered gun, and the fact that all the victims, quote, were alive until he got home, as Marshall told the jury. According to prosecutors, Gurpreet executed a precision plan. Shoot Hakikat in his sleep first, eliminating the biggest threat, then eliminate witnesses one by one. The pan on the stove and the half-eaten food left on tables showed how suddenly life was interrupted. Then, in the state's telling, Gurpreet tossed the gun in the pond, cleaned up, and put on his performance as an innocent, hysterical bystander. The defense, led by attorney Charlie Ridgers in the first trial, countered with a very different narrative. They conceded some damning facts up front to appear credible. Yes, Gurpreet had an affair with Navkiran. Yes, he lied about it to police. Yes, he paid for Navkiran's house and car. But none of that makes him a killer, they argued. Instead, the defense floated the idea that the real killers, multiple, were likely tied to that infamous land dispute in India. Ridgers told the jury that the so-called land mafia, criminal elements who were involved in the Penang land deal, had motive to target Hakikat. In a sensational claim, he said some of those individuals were actually wanted by FBI and Interpol, implying an international crime syndicate could have orchestrated a hit on the family. Furthermore, the defense offered an alternate version of events for that night. Ridgers suggested that 3 masked men broke into the apartment, armed not with guns, but with baseball bats, possibly to intimidate or beat the family over the money. According to this theory, Gurpreet encountered these intruders and ran out of the apartment in fear. When he came back moments later, perhaps after they left, he found everyone shot dead. Why would he run instead of fight or call 911 immediately is what everyone thought. The defense implied he panicked. They also argued that it made no sense for a single person to kill 4 adults in separate rooms with 2 possible exits. Thus, likely multiple attackers were involved. This was their attempt to cast doubt. If jurors thought at least 2 or 3 unknown men could have done it, then you can't be sure beyond reasonable doubt that it was Gurpreet. It was a bold strategy, but it only needed to sway one juror to block a unanimous verdict. Over the course of a 3-week trial in October 2022, jurors heard extensive testimony. The coroner even displayed autopsy photos of each victim, horrifying images that reportedly made some jurors and family members weep. Gurpreet himself did not testify, as is typical in death penalty cases. His interviews and 911 calls spoke for him. The jury heard his sobbing voice on the recording, heard the dispatcher ask, "Did you do something?" and then his denial. They watched body cam footage of him at the scene, hysterical but also with visible blood on his shirt. Was that the face of a guilty man, faking grief, or a traumatized man in genuine agony? Each juror had to interpret it. After closing arguments, the jury deliberated. And deliberated. It soon became apparent they were deadlocked. Later, it emerged that 11 of the 12 jurors were convinced Gurpreet was guilty, but one juror held out firmly, not convinced. Interestingly, the lone holdout was the only person of color on the jury, an African American woman, though it's not known what specific aspect about the case gave her doubt. Tensions apparently ran high in the jury room too. Reports later surfaced that jurors were yelling at each other, with one calling another an idiot, and mutual accusations of stubbornness flying. The judge in that trial, Greg Howard, questioned the jurors and found that further deliberation would not yield a unanimous verdict. So in October 2022, a mistrial was declared. A hung jury. This was a heavy blow to the victims' families, who had sat through every agonizing day only to see no resolution. The verdict was a shock, said Amarjeet's son Jasdeep, referring to the lack of a verdict. They had been so sure of a conviction. Emotions now ran hot among the lawyers too. Prosecutor Moser was infuriated at Judge Howard, later accusing the judge of mishandling the jury, for instance, not removing the contentious juror or not allowing a transcript review that the jury requested. Moser even tried to get Judge Howard removed from the case before retrial, claiming bias. It was unusual drama, indicating how strongly the state felt their case was solid and that one juror had essentially derailed justice. Throughout this, Gurpreet's family maintained he was innocent. They pointed out to anyone who would listen that Gurpreet had his own inheritance and assets. He didn't need Hakikat's land. Indeed, they noted, Gurpreet stood to inherit acres of farmland in Punjab from his parents one day, and at the time of the murders, he already had a respectable trucking business valued at about $250,000 with his truck and trailers. He had just parked $300,000 into the Indiana house and still had enough money in the bank. Plus, he was the one paying all of the family's bills. In short, his side argued, greed made no sense as a motive. He wasn't destitute. And if he wanted out of the marriage, he just could have divorced. Why would he kill his children's beloved mother and grandparents? Despite their belief though, Gurpreet Singh was not free to go after the hung jury. He remained jailed awaiting a retrial. For the second trial, he made a significant decision. He waived his right to a jury trial, opting instead to be tried by a panel of 3 judges. This is somewhat rare, but in capital cases, a defendant can choose a bench trial by a 3-judge panel in the state of Ohio. Gurpreet's new defense team likely calculated that a single holdout juror saved him last time, but conversely, the overwhelming majority had voted to convict. Perhaps they figured they'd have a better luck convincing at least one judge on a panel to have doubt, or they wanted to avoid the unpredictability of jurors' emotions entirely. Additionally, new defense attorneys came on board for the retrial, replacing Ridgers. Fresh eyes, fresh strategy. The retrial began on April 29, 2024, almost exactly 5 years to the day since the murders. In the courtroom sat judges Greg Howard, Keith Spaeth, and Greg Stephens. Ironically, Judge Howard remained despite prosecution's prior complaints. These 3 men would act as both jury and judge, weighing all evidence and deciding guilt, and if needed, the sentence too. The prosecution's case was largely the same, and if anything, just presented more crisply this time. A powerful moment came when prosecutors physically took the judges and the defense and the court staff to visit the actual crime scene at the apartment on day one of trial. Seeing the small space in person, the distance between the rooms and exits, may have reinforced how implausible the three masked men scenario was. The judges could observe that this was a confined apartment, not a sprawling house. One man with a gun could indeed control the scene quickly. The prosecution asserted that Gurpreet chose the timing perfectly, shooting Hakikat first in the back bedroom, then catching the rest off guard while a loud TV or cooking noises masked the initial shots. Defense attorney Alexandra Deirdroff, for her part, adjusted her defense strategy subtly. They again alluded to the land dispute in India with men of criminal background as a possible motive for someone else to target the family. However, it seems the defense did not heavily press the masked intruder story this time around, possibly realizing it hadn't convinced 11 out of 12 jurors the first time. Instead, their goal was to just poke enough holes to raise doubt. After a 10-day retrial, the three-judge panel took only about 2 hours to deliberate and reach a verdict. On May 5th, 2024, they returned to the courtroom and delivered a unanimous decision: guilty on all 4 counts of aggravated murder. Gurpreet Singh was now a convicted murderer.
We therefore unanimously find that the sentence of death should be imposed upon Gurpreet Singh under count 1 of the indictment, under count 2 of the indictment, under count 3 of the indictment, under count 4 of the indictment.
He showed no emotion as the verdict was read, sitting stoically, a contrast to his histrionics on the 911 call. Tears and relief swept through the victims' family members in attendance. They had traveled from as far as California, Canada, and India repeatedly over 5 years for this moment. Many wept as each guilty count was affirmed. Outside court, they thanked the prosecutors, investigators, and judges. It has been a tremendous emotional upheaval for them from the very beginning, Prosecutor Moses said to the family. But they had faith. My staff did a fantastic job. Attention then turned to sentencing. In Ohio, aggravated murder can carry the death penalty if certain criteria are met, such as multiple victims. The same 3 judges now had to weigh whether Gurpreet should get the ultimate punishment or life in prison. A separate mitigating hearing was held on May 14, 2024. Gurpreet's defense put forth mitigating factors. They had Gurpreet's parents testify via video from India about his upbringing and character, like Karam Singh, his father, who described Gurpreet as a smart, outgoing boy who had worked on the farm and never showed violence. He noted that Gurpreet and Shailinder had lived with them in India for a time after marriage, and he never witnessed any abuse or anger from Gurpreet towards his wife. Gurpreet's mother, Diljit, said her son was always well behaved, a good son who loves his sister and family. Essentially, they painted him as a gentle, hardworking man. The defense also likely pointed out that Ohio hadn't actually executed anyone in years. Governor Mike DeWine had halted executions since 2018, implying a de facto moratorium. But the judges were unswayed. They deliberated only about 2 hours on sentencing as well, and on May 14, 2024, they returned with the decision. Gurpreet Singh deserved death on each count. Formally, they recommended 4 death sentences, 1 per murder, though it only serves as a strong symbolic statement. Judge Greg Howard, the very judge Moser once tried to remove, announced the sentence calmly. Gurpreet again showed little to no reaction as the judges sentenced him to death, scheduled for November 27, 2024. With Gurpreet Singh now on death row, one chapter of this tragedy closed, but many repercussions will continue for years. Gurpreet's legal journey isn't quite over. Automatic appeals are underway, as is standard in capital cases. In mid-2024, his attorneys filed a direct appeal to the Ohio Supreme Court, seeking to overturn the conviction and sentence. They also requested a stay of execution, which the state did not oppose since Ohio had a hold on executions anyway. It may take years for all of these appellate processes to play out. In the meantime, Gurpreet sits in a correctional institute where Ohio houses male death row inmates. At 41 years old when convicted, he faces the possibility of being the first person Ohio might execute if the state resumes capital punishment. However, given the backlog and moratorium, it's possible he will live many decades behind bars. For the surviving families, the aftermath is marked by grief but also resilience. Even now, more than a decade later, relatives like Amarjeet's son struggle every day with grief. Quote, sometimes when my phone rings, I still think she's calling me, her son Gurinder said. The 3 children of Shailinder Kaur, who lost their mother, grandparents, and great aunt that night, are now growing up without either parent. But in a beautiful turn, Shailinder's uncle, Nirbhay Singh, and aunt Harpreet, the same relatives in California who cared for Shailinder herself as a child, have adopted the 3 kids. By 2023, the children were about 15, 12, and 7 years old. And Harpreet quit her job to take care of them full time. Culturally, the case opened discussions in the South Asian immigrant community about topics often kept private. Marital strife, mental health, and the pressures of upholding a perfect, happy family life. Shailinder, for example, had not wanted to consider divorce despite her husband's infidelity, a decision not uncommon among South Asian women who face stigma around divorce or prioritize their children's stability over their own hurt. Some wondered if there had been more open dialogue or community support for someone like Shailinder, could something have changed the outcome? In Westchester Township, life has moved on externally. The apartment on Wintry Drive no doubt has new occupants. The crime scene tape and diving teams are long gone. But long-time residents haven't forgotten. Even years later, many locals can recall exactly where they were when they heard about the Westchester Quadruple homicide. In the end, what remains most enduringly, though, are the memories of the victims. Shailinderjeet Kaur, the angelic mother who put her kids first. Hakikat Singh, a grandfather who overcame hardships to provide a future for his family. Paramjeet Kaur, a devoted mother and doting grandmother who held the family together with culture and love. And Amarjeet Kaur, a gentle soul who travelled across the world to be with her sister, only to lose her life in the home that was supposed to be her safe haven. May their memories be a blessing, and may we all hold our loved ones a little closer, learning from this tragedy that what lies behind smiling family photos can be complex. The story of the 2019 Westchester Quadruple murder is a stark reminder that sometimes the greatest dangers come from within one's own home and the darkest betrayals from those we trust the most. If you like what we do here at Desi Studios and absolutely love what we're wearing today, this is merch you can go buy all for yourself.
You can buy this Desi Crime merch in our YouTube store on the link down below at Kadak Merch. Keep the engines at Desi Studios rolling so we can pay our videographer right behind the camera to make these amazing episodes just for you.